Hello and welcome to Vinyl Worthy Albums. I'm Luke, I'm a picky vinyl buyer and a deep diver of music. What we do here is go through albums that I can enjoy from start to finish without feeling the need to skip any tracks, and if an album can do that, then there's a good chance it will be considered vinyl worthy. When an artist has a vinyl worthy album, I then listen to their whole discography to see how I feel about it. This is my own journey of music discovery, and as you join me, I hope you discover some music you too can enjoy. The reason I make this series is because I'm simply looking to talk about music. I hope you can join in, give me your thoughts, share your own vinyl-worthy albums, and I may get the chance to check them out. Okay, the Beatles need no biography from me, and I think their music does a better job for introducing people to them anyways. I feel like their career has been so well documented and documented so much that it does not need me to be adding anything to it, and anything that I would say wouldn't really be adding much at all in terms of a biography behind them. My personal introduction to the Beatles would have been from osmosis, Hey Jude probably being the most ubiquitous track of theirs growing up. More to come on Hey Jude later. When I was around age 15, I was a big fan of Matchbox 20, and I came across their live cover of Don't Let Me Down. I thought it was great, but it wasn't enough to make me delve into the Beatles just yet. Later on, when I was about 16, during college, I watched Nowhere Boy, a biographical film looking into John Lennon's early years. Again, this never hit a chord with me. A couple years later, when I was about 20, I watched the documentary George Harrison Living in the Material World. Some of the influences for why I committed myself to this long documentary was that I was at my peak hippie stage. I was studying in Bangor University, where one of the buildings I regularly went to was the spot where the Beatles practiced transcendental meditation with the Maharishi. Also, my mum would talk about how she used to live on the same street as George when she was a little girl, and I was wanting to learn more about what life would have been like for her then. By the end of the documentary, I was wanting to hear more of the Beatles, and conveniently, in the attic were my parents' old records, which included the Beatles compilation albums, and my interest spiraled from there. I just wonder how many other parents have got Beatles vinyl records that you just never knew were there. Some grails waiting to be discovered. Please note that the original recordings for the Beatles' music was mostly in mono. There are some truly awful stereo mixes out there which I find are so bad they do a huge disservice to the greatness of the music. I do my best to address this as it comes up as a problem throughout. Also note that fortunately, Giles Martin, son of the Beatles' primary producer George Martin, has in recent years remixed a few albums of theirs, and his mixes are incredible, sometimes surpassing my enjoyment of the monos. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get to it. When it comes to their debut album, Please Please Me, I find that the covers are amongst their better tracks that they've recorded on this album. Songs like Anna, Go to Him, it's a great song and it's a solid cover. I especially love the riff. Baby It's You, it's another cover song, and it was a good pick for them to cover. It has great backing melodies, and the lead guitar tone is classic early 60s that they've put on this recording. And they end with the cover of Twist and Shout, which is a well-recorded cover as well. Love Me Do is my favourite of their original tracks off of this album. I don't find myself blown away by it, but it is showing some promise for the future. I know that the opening track, I Saw Her Standing There, is a fan favourite. However, I could do with never hearing this one ever again. I guess you could say I actively dislike this song. With their next LP, With the Beatles, again, it's a similar story where, for the most part, I'm not particularly keen on most of what's on here. On track 2, All I've Got to Do, it's a great vocal performance from John, and the potential is really showing. And it's the same again with track 3, All My Loving, one for Paul this time. You can definitely tell that they are onto something here. Other notable tracks on this album are Please Mr. Postman, which is a cover of The Marvelettes from Motown Records, and I Want to Be Your Man. This was written by the Beatles, but then was soon after covered by the Rolling Stones. And I do actually prefer the Beatles version of this. I feel like they sound like proto Jim Morrison here. So on those first two albums, the stereo versions are god awful. However, on A Hard Day's Night, the fake stereos aren't as bad. So there's a few more songs that I take interest in off this album. And I Love Her is the most interesting song they've released so far in their career, in my opinion. For me, it's the first time where they start to show they can write more varied compositions. With Tell Me Why, it could be that it's coming after And I Love Her, that it feels like a good switch up in pace, as And I Love Her is such a palate cleanser. Anytime at All, I love the vocal licks, but the rest of the song doesn't live up to it. This could have had impact, but it misses the mark. On Things We Said Today, the verses feel like Burn My Fire. So yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the Doors were really into the Beatles. Overall, a few more tracks that I actually quite dig. Next up is Beatles For Sale, and this is definitely a drop in quality for me. A track that I don't mind, however, is the first one, No Reply. The melody on it reminds me of Scooby-Doo, the version that I grew up with the theme song. And I feel like this track has so much potential for it to be more interesting. I'm thinking of it in a kind of a Black Mirror, White Christmas kind of situation, but I don't think they were actually going for that. Alright, 1965, Help. This is where things really start to get interesting for me. A quick side note is that the remaster quality is slightly better than the previous remastered stereos, but still, I would definitely recommend the monos on this. With the opener Help, it's an iconic intro, but I'm not quite big on the rest of the song. It's grown on me from being a skipper to a potential grower. It might grow, but I don't know. On The Night Before, Paul sounds like Kurt Cobain, which is kind of cool. And next up is my first pillar from the Beatles on an album, with You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. I love this. John said this was him doing a Bob Dylan impression, and for me personally, his vocals remind me of Mark Chadwick of The Levellers. On I Need You, this could grow on me. I like the stabby guitar. The timing of it at the end is interesting as well, as it seems kind of imperfect, but it also kind of works. Definitely a bit of a head scratcher for me when I listen to it. I think I could study it a little bit more and there might be something strange going on there, or maybe not, and it could just be me. I really don't know. Another Girl is totally a skipper for me. It is absolute filler, and You're Going to Lose That Girl is not quite as disliked by me, but is still definitely mostly filler. The panning of the bongo in the right ear makes this bad enough to skip on the stereo for sure. Ticket to Ride. It's an intriguing riff. The sustained A chord gives it that Indian raga feel, and I love the ending with the coda. It's a keeper, but may actually end up as a pillow one day. Act Naturally. I believe this is a cover, and Ringo's on this one, and it's a fun switch up. I genuinely enjoy Ringo's voice, I gotta say. It's Only Love is decent, and I would definitely recommend the mono version on this. I'd say the warbly guitar is perhaps the most interesting part of this one too. While I like the piano on You Like Me Too Much, the lyrics and the vocals are my least favourite on this one, and the piano is just not enough for me to want to really ever go back to it. Tell Me What You See is an easy skip for me. And next up, Paul blows my face off. I've just seen the face. I love this one. It could even be one of my favourite songs of all time, in fact. I love the skiffle energy of it. Reminds me of Simon and Garfunkel, who, yeah, I know came later, but has kind of that feel to it. It could be done by them. And I love performing this one myself. And then, of course, Yesterday, Simply Great. Would have been the better album closer, I'm pretty sure, because Dizzy Miss Lizzy, it's a simple rocker, it's fine, and it would fit into soundtracks, and I feel it's like a total background track really, and I'd also prefer it if it was cut to about 2 minutes long at most. It could easily be skipped, but I don't know, I kind of find it alright enough to have it on as background, so yeah, it's in that category. I doubt it's really going to grow into more of a keeper really though. But yeah, to me, Help is the Beatles absolutely hitting their stride. Rubber Soul came out very, very closely to the release of Help, so they didn't have a lot of time to actually write or record this album. And at times it does feel like it's a little bit rushed. However, some of the songs on here are absolutely fantastic, and overall it's a really solid album. I have to admit, this one took a bit of a journey for me. The first time hearing it, I thought it was solid, but I didn't really remember all that much of it. And then years later, in prep for this video, my first return to it was a feeling of disappointment. And then after more listens, I then came to settle on the ratings that you're seeing right now, which again is back to it being solid, if not even leaving more of an impression on me this time. And I can't help but be impressed by how the guys managed to pull this off in such a short span of time as well. So they open up with Drive My Car, and this is a pillar for me. I actually really love this. To me, I find this is kind of closer to the feel and the sound and the energy of a lot of their earlier tracks, which is unusual because, as you could tell, that I wasn't really into the earlier sound of their music, with only really a few exceptions. And then on this one, I feel like this just captures everything they were trying to do back then, but does it perfectly. And then next up, they give us Norwegian Wood, which is another classic. It's a great riff from John, which George used the sitar to play on. It's the first instance of the sitar and a hint of Indian influence as well. And here's a hint. Going forward, pretty much every track George puts the Indian influence on it, I end up loving it. You Won't See Me grew on me after a few listens. And Nowhere Man, it's another pillar. Love this one. John is on great form. Think for Yourself is a skipper, unfortunately. It's totally forgettable. The Word, I really enjoy The Word. It feels like there's an undertone of Satanism in it. I know there isn't, but I don't know. I just feel like there is. Like, I could definitely see this track being used for cognitive dissonance in a TV show or a film. Michelle took a little bit of time to grow on me, but I can't deny how sophisticated it sounds. Girl grew on me as well. I love the harmonies and John's breathing on this. Great creative decision to add those in. We get another pillar on I'm Looking Through You. Paul just delivers. And so does John on In My Life. Fantastic from John once again. I love George Martin's Bach-inspired harpsichord section. Definitely a standout on the track. With the next two tracks, Wait and If I Needed Someone, these two grew on me as well. I think that they're pretty solid. So finally, Run For Your Life, and this one is a bit complicated. It's ridiculous with the lyrics to the point of it being funny, and especially with how John puts in such a believable vocal performance, which kind of saves the track, but at the same time, it makes me feel very uneasy about it, given what we know about John and his personal behavior with women at times in his life. So yeah, it does make me feel very conflicted with how I feel about this track. Alright, Revolver. Here we go. Mono is still my preferred version for this, but Giles's 2022 remix is brilliant. Okay, so you'll notice that I do have some skippers on this album. It's interesting that this album is easily one of the best of all time, yet by my rule of no skippers, it is not vinyl worthy. We open the album with Taxman from George, and it's fine. It's not an essential track for me whatsoever though, so a really interesting choice to open the album with it. Next up is Eleanor Rigby, and Paul is on fire with his tracks. Next up is I'm Only Sleeping, another pillar. Love this one. Such a mood. The production is incredible. And next up we have another pillar. Love You Too. We had the sitar on Norwegian Wood, but now this is a full Indian groove. Absolutely love it. Here, there and everywhere. It's beautifully delicate. The backing vocals are my favourite part. There is potential here for this to be upgraded to a pillar. We'll see how that goes. And then there's Yellow Submarine. Alright, now they give Ringo something special. I adore this track. And again, another pillar. There's so many in a row. She Said, She Said. It's fantastic. Okay, then there's a dip. Good Day Sunshine. What an intro it has. I sometimes find myself singing it, but the rest, I very much forget it. Next up is And Your Bird Can Sing. It's all solid, just not quite reaching pillar levels. For No One, I like the French horn, but overall this isn't up to the quality of most of Paul's recent tracks. Out of the two skippers for me, I Want to Tell You is the weakest track in my opinion. But then they've closed off the album with two bangers, Got to Get You Into My Life, such a bop, and then the legendary Tomorrow Never Knows. One of the best closing tracks ever, one of the best John tracks ever, one of the best Beatles songs ever, one of the best tracks ever. Okay, now we're on Sgt. Pepper. And like Revolver, this has skippers. I have the Giles remixed version, and I find his remix is an improvement from the mono. Sgt. Pepper, it's a fantastic intro, which then leads into With a Little Help from My Friends. It's brilliant. I love Ringo's performance. It was a fantastic choice to put him on the vocals for this one. And it's a top tier John track for Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. The production across the first three tracks is groundbreaking. No other words. Paul gives us a solid track of his with Getting Better, but then misses the mark on Fixing a Hole. I love the lick at 22 seconds, but the rest of the track goes nowhere interesting for me. Then we pick right back up with She's Leaving Home, which is just gorgeous. A pillar. An easy skipper for me is Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, and then When I'm 64. On the latter, the corn of it, I just can't. But in between those two tracks is George's Within You Without You, which is George's best track for the Beatles personally, second only to What Is Love from his solo album All Things Must Pass. Lovely Rita is unessential, it's fine. Good Morning, Good Morning, it's not going to make a pillar anytime for me, but the sound of the drums on this and the horns, they're huge. Really good production. Then we get the reprise. It sounds ridiculously ahead of its time. And then another iconic closer with A Day in the Life. And I can understand when people say this is the best Beatles song ever. Maybe not for me personally, but I can understand why people would say that. Okay, so is this a surprise for you guys? Magical Mystery Tour is the vinyl-worthy release. No skippers. Opening with the track of the same name as the album, it's clear to see that they have continued the sound from Sgt. Pepper. I really dig this track. Fool on the Hill is solid, fits well. Am I right in thinking that Flying is the first instrumental from them on a full LP? It's inessential, but it fits well again. George's Blue Jay Way, the psychedelic production fits George really well. Track number 5, Your Mother Should Know, is the weakest track for me, but it's still fine and it doesn't overstay its welcome. Next up is I Am the Walrus, and it's all about the verses here. The rest is just fine. On the flip side, we open with Hello Goodbye. It's an easy pillar, the drums are low-key excellent, and what a fun outro. Okay, this is where I get probably very controversial. Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane are not favourites of mine by any means. Not even keepers, if I'm honest. Just barely scraping by as being potential growers into being keepers. What can I say? They just never really struck a chord with me. But what did strike a chord with me were the final two tracks. Baby You're a Rich Man is one of my favourite songs, full stop. Shout out to David Fincher for using it at the end of The Social Network. It's impossible for me not to sing along to this one. And then finally, All You Need Is Love. Another Beatles album closed off with a absolute banger. George Martin apparently suggested putting the French national anthem at the start. Genius move. So, final word on this one is that if the skippers from Sgt. Pepper were replaced with the pillars from here, it would have formed the maybe greatest album ever made. What are your thoughts? Okay, the White Album. So I'm guessing with how successful Sgt. Pepper was and how experimental it was, they wanted to really up the ante, and they did that by making a double album with the White Album. And I have to admit, I was really put off listening to this, maybe because of The Simpsons, with their episode of the B-Sharps.
For all the latest medical poop, call Surgeon General C. Everett Koop. Koop, koop, a doo.
For a while, I thought that they were referring to this album in particular and it being a big disappointment. So I was going into it thinking that's what to expect. However, I kind of realized that they were talking more about Let It Be, which we'll get onto. As you can see by the ratings, I really dig a lot of this. Starting with Back in the USSR, it's fun. But I gotta say, something is just off for me that I just can't put my finger on this track. Because at times it feels like it should be a pillar, but there's something that isn't there that I feel like is needed before it can get to that point for me. The next track, Dear Prudence, the bass on the 2018 mix is incredible. It's a solid keeper with potential for it being a pillar. Glass Onion is another solid keeper. Some great comments I've seen on this are that you can hear how it went on to influence David Bowie, but my favourite comment was that it's like if Wario tried to write Drive My Car. I really like Obladi Oblada. I feel like there's a division when it comes to this track as well. I've heard people say that they really enjoy this one, as well as some that say that they can't stand it. It's really fun to sing along to, and the bass is killer. Wild Honey Pie is definitely a strange one. I find that it fits really well into this album in this spot especially, and it's short enough to not be annoying. I feel like I'm hearing Proto Primus. Fitting well again with this point of the album is the continuing story of Bungalow Bill, and I feel like it works even better with the next track being While My Guitar Gently Weeps. And while, okay, this is an easy pillar, but unfortunately, I've heard this too many times for it to be enjoyable like it should be. This is what I'm going to call a should be retired track. Tracks that you could easily go the rest of your life never hearing again, and then maybe just before you die, you hear it one more time, and then you're like, oh yeah, that's a banger. Closing off side A is Happiness is a Warm Gun. The 2018 mix again sounds amazing. Martha My Dear sounds so damn good. I would be interested in hearing a stripped down version of this like with Blackbird as well. I also really dig I'm So Tired. Blackbird, I can't deny the beauty. There's lots of admiration for this track, and yeah, I totally know why. I love the Baroque sound on Piggies. This could be a pillar for me after a few revisits, like with Rocky Raccoon. Also love this one. They're really having fun with it, and so am I. Don't Pass Me By is the weakest track up to now, and with Why Don't We Do It in the Road, this is extra funny when the next track is I Will. Julia is gorgeous. There's a lot of tension in the progression at times as well. I should really be checking that one out to see what's going on in that one. It's getting my music theory senses tingling. Overall as a track, Birthday is just okay. However, I do want to say that the piano sound is awesome. It sounds like it was sampled by SL2 in On a Ragga Tip, but I know it's not. Your Blues. The Beatles doing the blues, hell yeah. John's vocals fucking rule. The bass is thick as well. Ace track. Mother Nature's Son has some majestic strings on it. Everybody's got something to hide except me and my monkey. John's performance is great again, and the bells remind me of the New York Stock Exchange. I gotta skip Sexy Sadie. I just can't get with the progression of it. After that, Helter Skelter, legendary. Long, long, long. The mix of this one is perfection. I skip Revolution 1 as I much prefer the B-side to Hey Jude version or the live version which are faster. I just feel that energy fits the song a lot better than the slower pace to the version that is in this album. Not quite sure why John was so insistent on putting the slower version on this album. Honey Pie has the potential to grow on me, and Savoy Truffle has moments, but as a whole I skip it. Same again with Cry Baby Cry, totally forgettable for me. And Revolution 9, it's fascinating how this made the cut. I won't be listening to this one again. Thankfully though, they give us a gorgeous track to end this ambitious double album on. Good Night is a brilliant way to finish this brilliant album. And I can see how this would have influenced Billy Corgan on Melancholy. Next up is Yellow Submarine, which is a film soundtrack. Skipping over tracks that we know, such as Yellow Submarine and All You Need Is Love, not including them in my ratings really, but all I can say is that the stereo mix of this makes their songs sound awful. What makes Only a Northern Song a skipper is that I don't find this listenable in any way whatsoever, both on a mono version or a stereo. And then, yeah, when it comes to the other tracks on the first side, they are good tracks and they are let down solely by the terrible stereo versions that I've heard. And I would highly recommend seeking out the monos. And then on the other side, they are instrumentals from George Martin. So not really Beatles tracks, but still some say George Martin is the secret Beatle. And I do actually quite like his compositions. Reminds me a lot of John Williams at times. Maybe inspired John Williams, who knows? And things only get more complicated from here. As you can see, I'm reviewing Let It Be, which was officially released after Abbey Road. However, Abbey Road was recorded after Let It Be and is the true final album from the band. So that's my reasoning behind that. And also I will be reviewing the naked version of Let It Be, as I feel like that is the definitive version. The original version was produced by Phil Spector and was highly criticised for its sound, and I think rightly so. The naked version provides us with a lot more stripped-back versions of the songs, and they do sound better in my opinion. It's the version that I do recommend you all check out. However, go and listen to the original Phil Spector produced version, as it is quite fascinating to see the difference. As I was saying before with the Simpsons mocking the Beatles, it really occurred to me that they were definitely referring to the Beatles during Let It Be, as this was all over the place. And we're not even including the tracks that were taken out of the original version, because the naked version replaces them with better tracks. So let's just talk about the music now. Okay, we got Get Back, which is a solid track. Dig a Pony and For You Blue, yeah, completely forgettable. The Long and Winding Road, there's just something not quite right again for me with this. I feel like it may one day grow on me to be a keeper, but there's just something just not quite right there. Two of Us, skipper. I've Got a Feeling, solid. I love it when John comes in. One After 909. Forget the skippers on this album. They're not even worth talking about. Don't Let Me Down is easily one of their best tracks ever, and it is absolutely shocking that it wasn't included on the original cut of this album. Across the Universe is gorgeous. This is definitely the definitive version that I've heard of the track. Go and listen to the Phil Spector version. It's just night and day difference. And then finally on this track listing, we end with Let It Be, which I have to say, even on the Phil Spector's version of this album, it was still great then, and it's great on this version too. I do find it fascinating how the guys can be amongst such turmoil and chaos in the recording sessions for this album, while give us such bangers like Let It Be and Don't Let Me Down and Across the Universe. Alright, and finally, Abbey Road. Come Together has amazing verses. The chorus is very catchy, but there's something about it that just begs for it to rip loose, and it never quite gets there. It's still a pillar though. Something is extremely sophisticated. It's produced so well, and I totally understand why people rank this as George's best. Paul's at it again with his corn on Maxwell's Silver Hammer, this time about a serial killer, which is oddly edgy for him though. Not an essential track, but enjoyable enough to not warrant skipping. Thankfully, Paul quits the corn when he gives us Oh Darling, which is one of my favourites. One of the greatest vocal performances full stop for me personally. Octopus's Garden is 1 out of 2 Soul Ringo written credited tracks, and what a track for him to put down before they parted ways. I'm really happy for Ringo that he got to put this track down before they parted ways, as it's such a lovely track and a great way for him to end his legacy with the band. With I Want You, She's So Heavy, they're just on another level here. There's so much feel. The whole band are at their best. Here Comes the Sun, thanks George. Sadly, Because is a skipper. I could honestly do without this one. And then we have the medley, starting with You Never Give Me Your Money. It's okay. Sun King, I always confuse this one with Albatross from Fleetwood Mac. It's good. Me Mr. Mustard is the low point of the medley. Thankfully, it's the shortest point of it. Thankfully, Polythene Palm is an improvement, and it reminds me of The Who. Carry That Weight has an ace distorted guitar tone. With The End, I love that they declared the end of the Beatles in the naming of this, even if it felt quite abrupt. And I just wish that we would have had something truly epic, like something I could put up as being a pillar to end the Beatles. But yeah, we get this and it's fine. Could have been better. And because I want to be a completionist of the Beatles, here are the Unmentioned Singles and B-sides in order of release. I'd put She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand amongst their better works. I love Paul's bits on We Can Work It Out. It even has the potential to be a pillar. Paperback Writer, the tone of the riff is cool as hell. The bass tone is ace. The a cappella dropout harmonies, it's amazing songwriting. With Rain, Ringo is a beast. Lady Madonna has such a great melody. It's really fun as well. Hey Jude, very much like While My Guitar Gently Weeps, this needs to go into retirement. I enjoy the Ballad of John and Yoko, and with You Know My Name, it's loads of goofy fun mixed into a sick jam. I recommend the longer anthology version of this. The 2023 mixes are an improvement on any of the other stereos out there. There's less panning, which I prefer. When it comes to Now and Then, I am not a lover of it. I find that there is definitely a good song somewhere in there, but the actual released version is just not doing it for me, especially with the production of it. George even said that when they were working on it, that it was fucking rubbish. He may have just been referring to the condition of it when they were working on it many, many years ago, or he could have been referring to that it was just not even worth putting anything together for it anyways. But I did hear a cover of it in the style of the early Beatles.
Because of you, and now and then.
Much preferred for me than the track that they released. And that pretty much does it. That's almost, if not all, of the Beatles' music covered there. So, as you could see, I'm very much in preference of the middle to later years of the Beatles' career. John and Paul were probably the most prolific songwriting duo of all time, and they were very much equals in their contributions to the Beatles as a whole. And George's contributions at times cannot be understated as well. Ringo brought a solid foundation to the band with his drumming. I don't buy all the joke that Ringo is a bad drummer. I think that is a total misunderstanding of just what he brought to the group, and that he has his own style that is really underrated, even though I'm not a drummer myself. When I hear people who talk about Ringo who are drummers, there's nothing but respect there for him. That concludes this episode. Thank you for watching if you got this far. Remember to check out other vinyl-worthy episodes if you like this. Our taste might align more than you think, and you may discover something new to love.
Peace and love. Peace and love.
Bye.